What's his legacy? The war on terror? The war in Iraq?
George Bush did not declare a war on terror on September 11th. He redeclared it, which is a crucial distinction. The Reagan administration, when it came into office 20 years earlier, declared a war on terror. They stated that the core of their foreign policy would be the struggle against international terrorism, the plague of the modern age, a return to barbarism in our time, and so on and so forth. And they carried out what they called a war on terror. Now, this has been wiped out of history for a good reason. Their war on terror immediately turned into a vicious, brutal, and murderous terrorist war. And its main target was Central America, where they killed hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed 4 countries. There were other targets too. In Southern Africa, they were strongly supporting the apartheid state in violation of congressional restrictions. They had a major role not only in its crimes, but in its depredations in the neighboring countries, which killed over 1 million people. As late as 1988, just before the apartheid state fell, the U.S. government declared that Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress were among the more notorious terrorist groups in the world. That was the first war on terror. Well, that's best forgotten. That's not good for our self-image. So that's been whitewashed out of history. But that's the war on terror, which Bush redeclared, and not surprisingly, it turned into a violent, aggressive war.
Bush, in his rhetoric, wants to redraw the map of the Middle East, wants to democratize, wants to export democracy. What does that mean to you?
It means exactly as much as it meant when Stalin said that he was in favor of bringing democracy to the world. In fact, if you read we're getting Russian archives, and it's interesting to read the internal records where these thugs are talking to each other and not for the public, and talking about the need to protect Eastern European democracy, people's democracy, from the fascist forces from the West, and so on and so forth. And they probably believe that they're talking to each other. Yes, it's very easy to talk about promoting democracy. And if you have a very loyal commissar class who simply conform to power unthinkingly, they'll repeat it. On the other hand, if you look at the facts, it's a joke. I mean, even standard scholarship recognizes that the leading scholar of democracy promotion, also an advocate and a Reaganite, is Thomas Carruthers, the most respected. He's done careful work on it, and he thinks it's very important. But he does point out, he's an honest scholar, he says every U.S. president has been schizophrenic. They support democracy if and only if it conforms to strategic and economic objectives. Correct, and so did Stalin. Which means, if we're honest, that the whole talk about democracy promotion is a complete fraud. And you can see it in case after case. I'm going to take, say, the Middle East. He wants to democratize the Middle East. There has been one free democratic election in the Middle East, carefully monitored, carefully supervised, namely in the Palestinian territories in January 2006. Free election, everyone agreed, carefully monitored, no fraud, and so on. What was the U.S. reaction to it? Instantly to turn to punishing the population bitterly for voting the wrong way in a free election. Wrong way meaning the way we didn't like. Yeah, that's right. Stalin would have cheered. And he would have been very happy that Western intellectuals call this democracy promotion. I don't want to say that Western intellectuals are comparable to Stalinist commissars. They're much worse. For the Stalinist commissars, they could at least plead fear and extenuation. Western intellectuals can't plead fear, just a subordination to power.
Do you have any hope for the future? Do you have any hope of change in the next elections?
Well, the elections themselves, the political leaders themselves are not going to institute any significant change. But any political leader is going to react to the popular mood and to popular activism. Actually, we just saw an example of that, striking example 2 days ago, when Congress was compelled by a populist rebellion to vote down a stimulus package. But if the public is organized and active, it can create conditions under which any political leader will carry out some constructive actions, otherwise not. About 95% of the public in the most recent polls criticize the government because it pays no attention to public opinion. Now, good, that's a sign of hope. That means that there have been major efforts to depoliticize the country, to atomize people, to separate them from one another so that they don't enter the political arena. But those are not laws of nature. They've been overcome in the past. They're overcome elsewhere. Those are signs of hope.
Most people want better health care, want better education, but still they vote for parties who do the opposite.
Because they have no choice. See, in fact, if the healthcare is a very interesting and illustrative case. For decades, the American healthcare system is a total catastrophe. Has twice the per capita costs of other industrial societies and about the worst outcomes. And people suffer from it. And they think, for decades, the public has been strongly in favor of a national healthcare system. Up until 2004, the election of 2004, this could not enter. In fact, you take a look at the discussion in 2004. It was mentioned that the public's in favor of this, but it was called politically impossible or lacking political support in the New York Times. Only the large majority of the public, but that's not political support. In this election, it's a little different. The Democratic candidates, at least, have put forth programs which are not what the public wants, but are moving in that direction. Well, what changed between 2004 and 2008? And not public opinion, which has always been in favor of it. What changed is that a sector of corporate power, namely the manufacturing industries, are being smashed by the highly inefficient privatized healthcare system. So General Motors said it costs them more than $1,000 to produce a car in Detroit than it does across the border in Windsor, Canada. Well, when a big sector of American capital becomes concerned about something, it becomes politically possible. Now, if we had a free press here and in Europe, and we had honest political commentators, they would point out that this is a devastating critique of the functioning of American democracy. Something that the public wants and is critically important for them becomes politically possible if General Motors wants it. Before that, it wasn't politically possible. Now, that can be overcome. And it's not just on domestic affairs. The same is true internationally. Take probably the major international issue that's on the horizon has to do with Iran. Both political candidates insist that the United States must be a criminal state. It must violate the UN Charter by threatening war against Iran. And they both do it, and that's not discussed. That's taken for granted. Everybody must do that. We're an outlaw state. What does the public think? By a large majority, the public's opposed. By a very large majority, the public favors a nuclear-free weapon zone in the region, including Iran and Israel, and any American forces there. Well, that's politically impossible. No political candidate can mention it. The press won't even report it, that the public opinion polls. Okay, these are signs of severe deficiency in American, in fact, Western democracy, but they can be overcome.
Professor Chomsky, we could go on for hours, but I thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you very much.